I have the unenviable job of introducing somebody who needs no introduction, but before I do that, I just want to once again thank the sponsors of this symposium, our sixth symposium, Grand Canyon National Park Service, who provide this venue for us, Grand Canyon Conservancy. Where would we be without Grand Canyon Conservancy? And just to remind you, your badge will get you 25% off items in the bookstores, Grand Canyon Conservancy bookstores. The Grand Canyon Private Boaters Association, Delaware North provided us what qualifies as cheap rooms these days, and also the Arizona Historical Society has given us a grant that allows us to do these professional Vimeos that'll be accessible to you, and Vishnu Temple Press also, and you can bid on a whole bit of Vishnu Temple Press books. So as I said, the person that I need to introduce tonight needs no introduction. Most of you know Dr. Tom Myers. He's been a fixture here at Grand Canyon for 33 years and grew up in Flagstaff. And you probably know him best for his book, Over the Edge, Death in the Grand Canyon, which has sold over 400,000 copies and is in his 40th printing. But I don't want to talk about that, because what I want to talk about is what Tom's been working on lately and what we're going to hear something about in the near future. Tom has been working on a project for the last 5 years, another book that has morphed from one topic, Down the Gorge with Uncle George Steck, about the hiking career of George Steck, who we heard a little bit about this morning. But it has morphed into something much more personal for Tom and for his family, because he has completed a through hike through the Grand Canyon with his son Wesley. And the book that he's working on, which should be available in the fall of 2024, documents this personal journey of how the Grand Canyon has touched his life and caused him to become so much closer to Wesley in particular, but to his whole family. And I also want to recognize Becky, who's sitting with him here tonight. I couldn't be more privileged to introduce to you Dr. Tom Myers of the Grand Canyon.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. What a privilege, and I'm just so excited to see so many friends that I haven't seen in years. I really want to do a shout out to all the staff with the Historical Society. Dave Mortensen. Oh, sure. Oh. And everybody who's been in the behind the scenes, and Charlie and Ronnie specifically to make sure this works. Again, thank you very much.
Grand Canyon, Grand Canyon, Grand Canyon, Grand Canyon.
The Grand Canyon. How could words ever do it justice?
In the Grand Canyon, one may see the vast storybook of time opened by the Colorado River.
This fierce, relentless force of nature tears its way through the Grand Canyon.
The beauty of the Grand Canyon grips and humbles and uplifts the spirit.
By gosh, something sure happened here. Grand Canyon.
Its size numbs the mind.
Grand Canyon.
Is not this something of the beginning of man, reenacted by God himself?
So there you have the Grand Canyon of the Colorado, the greatest of all natural spectacles in this land of ours.
So what do we call that behavior? In the emergency medical services world at Grand Canyon, it's job security. In the medical physiology world, it's testosterone poisoning. And that afflicts all males, some more than others. That was a testosterone overdose. But at least he was wearing a helmet, right? So again, I'm Tom Myers, and I really appreciate y'all coming out. The title of my talk is Lessons from Life and Death and Doctoring in Grand Canyon. My alternate title is How I Became the Happiest Doctor on Earth. That is me in the middle, from many years ago. What will you learn from this? Well, hopefully how to stay out of this book. It's more than you ever wanted to know about who, what, when, where, how, and why people die in Grand Canyon. I've tried really hard to stay out of it myself, and there, but for the grace of God, I'm here today because I pushed the limits down there many times. I'm going to hit on a couple highlights of natural hazards and hopefully give you some take-home messages for hikers and backpackers. I know there's a bunch of you out there, as well as river runners. Talk about the Colorado River. Before we get into that, I want to talk about being a doctor at Grand Canyon. Sometimes I scratch my head and say, well, how the heck did I get here? How did I end up here? And it's probably a lot different than you might think. It really came down to a couple people. The first one was my mother. That's her in the middle. I'm the one holding the football. I got to thank my mom for allowing this to happen. First, because she went through a painful divorce. She's the mother. She's 90 years old and 9 kids. And unfortunately, my dad really wasn't around much. And when she finally called it quits, she decided to move us to Flagstaff when I was a kid. And I like to think I'm a native. I am at heart, but I'm not actually one. But anyway, Flagstaff is right down the road. So unfortunately, as a mother of 9 and not having a dad around, we were a welfare family. But the thing that was kind of cool about that is the closest place for an iconic vacation was Grand Canyon National Park. Right? So we would come up here and spend a week at Mather Campground and hang out, and my mom would let us run willy-nilly around the park and up and down the trails and whatnot. Kids did that then. The other thing, she has 9 kids, 2 girls, 7 boys. I'm the 7th out of 9, and she's a very devout Catholic. And she would say, she had careers picked out for us, and she would say, I have 7 sons. One of you needs to be a priest, and one of you needs to be a doctor. Gosh dang it. And anyway, I'm like, I don't know. I thought girls were pretty interesting. I thought I might want to have one day, maybe get married, maybe have a family. I'm like, I'll let Dave or Joe or Terry or Jim or John or Jerry have that priest job. I'll do the doctor thing. And part of the reason I was inspired is because I learned so much from my mother. I saw her work very, very hard. She got a job at Kmart in the clothing department for minimum wage, and she worked very hard to keep us out of foster care and stuff. And our house was about 1,100 square feet, and there were 10 of us in there. So her work ethic was really inspiring, but I also didn't want to disappoint her. I was a mama's boy, for sure. I still am. Anyway, so probably starting when I was in junior high, maybe high school, I was on this path to try to be a doctor. At least that's what I thought. This is me as an undergrad at NAU in Flagstaff, a pre-med doctor wannabe. I was doing the usual science background. I was studying chemistry. My senior year was a couple of classes from a chemistry degree, but I really loved history. I really had just an incredible interest in history of the American West, and I decided I wanted to get a history degree instead. And secretly, I wanted to be an interpretive ranger at Grand Canyon. Part of it was I had a family friend when I was a kid. His parents would take me to Lake Powell, and I would listen to the interpretive talks and stuff, and I just thought it was really fascinating. So I got a degree in history. But I applied to medical school, and lo and behold, I got in. The problem for me in medical school was I found it much like taking an off-trail route in Grand Canyon. Where college was maybe the Bright Angel Trail or South Kaibab, medical school was a really hard, gnarly off-trail route. And the thing about this, interesting about the comparison to Grand Canyon, you start off fresh and excited and enthusiastic, and quickly you feel like you're getting abused by the terrain. You feel at times cliffed out. You're confronted by terrifying exposure, and worst of all, in my case, lost and thought I was on the wrong path completely. But just like hiking in Grand Canyon, the farther you go down, the harder it is to turn around, right? So you keep going, and you hope and pray, in my case with all your might, that the destination's worth the journey. I don't know how many remember a book or a movie called The House of God. Anybody remember that? Came out, good. It came out in the 70s. This book was written by a psychiatrist. His name was Stephen Bergman. He went by the name Samuel Shem. The book was a bestseller, and it was made into a major motion picture. One of the things that, when I started medical school, a doctor came in, and he wrote on the chalkboard. He didn't say a word. He just went to the chalkboard. He wrote, "Medical school is the single greatest deterrent to mental health and life, physician." And then Dr. Bergman wrote, Samuel Shem wrote, "This internship, this whole training destroys people." Does anybody know what a residency is? You ever heard that word? Do you know why they're called resident doctors? Because you lived at the hospital. When I got out, I was kind of struggling with the whole thought of being a doctor. And when I was an intern, Becky can attest to this, the hours were pretty horrific. It was, you go in I get up at 5, go in at 6, I get off at 6 or later. And then every third or fourth night you're on call for 36 hours. And my first 6 weeks I was in the intensive care unit managing patients, very green. I was averaging probably about 110-hour weeks. And there was a stretch during that time with all those horrific hours that I went for 43 days without a day off. And the problem with that whole training, and it's changed a lot, but it was very old school, like I did it, and by God, if you're gonna be here, you gotta have to do it. And it was really hard for me because I felt like, I could handle the academic rigor, but what I came to despise was sort of the hypocritical culture of medicine, the unhealthy lifestyle, the physical and emotional toil. And I don't know if you guys know this, but medicine has some of the highest rates of depression, drug addiction, alcoholism, and suicide of any profession. So I knew it was taking its toll on me, and I told Becky at one point, kind of in a moment where I was really doing some serious soul searching, I said, "I don't want to do this. I really don't like it. I don't like the culture here. I don't like the doctors. I don't like how this is being forced on me this way. I don't have a life. I think I'm going to suck as a doctor." And I said, "So I want to do something else." And unfortunately, both of us came from families that didn't have any money. We had debt. We had an infant daughter. I was like, "Well," she said, "I'll support whatever you want to do. I just want you to be happy." And I'm like, "Great." So I did do my internship, and at the end, I was having these mixed feelings, and I went to the head of the internal medicine department at St. Joseph's Hospital, and I said, "Hey, I'm going to leave." And he goes, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I said, "I think I'm going to go to the Grand Canyon." He goes, "And do what? You're a dirt farmer?" And I said, "No, I think I'm going to be a ranger." And he goes, "A ranger? You give Smokey the Bear enemas?" And I said, "No, I want to be an interpretive ranger. What's that?" And I explained to him, and this is a true story. And he said, well, good luck. And several others in the field, including own family members, say, "You're making the mistake of your life." And I'm like, "Well, it's my life, isn't it?" But reality set in, and I had a wife and an infant, and I moved back to Flagstaff. We were living in a trailer with my brother and his wife and their 2 kids, and me and Becky and the baby. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just try to get, the medicine. So I applied to the Board of Medical Examiners. I had passed my boards and all this stuff, and I'll get my license and just see if it's different out in the real world. So I called around in northern Arizona. I called Williams, and I asked if they need any help as a doctor, and they said, "Yeah, can you work tomorrow?" All these rural places were always hard up for docs. And I said, "Well, let me call BOMEX, the Board of Medical Examiners, to get my license pushed through." And they got it, and I worked there and they did 24-hour, 7-day a week with emergencies after hours. And within a couple weeks, I got a phone call from this guy sitting next to me here. This is the second most important guy in my life, really, I think. But the second most important person that helped me get to be the doctor. And this is Dr. Jim Wergler. Everybody needs a mentor. I'm sure everybody out there probably has somebody who influenced their life. You can't even put a measure on how much it made a difference. This was the man I needed. How many of you remember Marcus Welby, or ever heard that? Remember that? Okay, he was a doctor in Yosemite, California, Yosemite National Park for 20 years before he came to Grand Canyon. And he took me under his wing and he mentored me. And it was he and I on call every other night for emergencies. I was hired, that's me, before my hair went white, 33 years ago, and our staff. And we were on call every other night for emergencies. Now, that was even worse call than an intern, right? But it was different, it was just, the setting, the vibe. Jim Wergler was great. J-Dub, I love you. I missed you so much. But it was just a great thing. And like that, a flip switched, and I thought, wow, maybe I can do this. So here's Grand Canyon Clinic. When there's trouble in paradise, we have the clinic. The clinic was actually built in 1967 as a hospital. It was a state-of-the-art hospital for the Park Service. There were hospitals in Yellowstone, Yosemite, and Grand Canyon. And Grand Canyon's in 67 was state-of-the-art. It cost over $1 million. Stuart Udall, the Secretary of Interior, personally came out to dedicate it. Unfortunately, like so many rural hospitals, it ceased to exist as a hospital with admissions and baby deliveries and all that stuff in 1976. And then after that, it became a 24-hour medical care facility for urgent, emergent, and primary care. And that's what I signed up for. Now, here, the Park Service, or with the park visitation, we get over 6 million visitors pre-COVID. It's really climbed up a lot. I'm going to just say that I want to focus on 30,000 daily visitors and about 10,000 people who can stay within the village, within lodging, residents, and Tucson. So you can imagine any town of 30,000 or 10,000 at night, anything and everything could happen, right? Car wreck, gunshot, a fall, fracture, a heart attack, strokes, all those things. So that's what we would deal with. And so we provided care for the locals and river runners and backpackers, and we did all those services. One thing that changed my mind, too, about medicine working up here was what I consider the art of medicine, especially rural medicine in a remote location. You play doctor for real. When you're in a big city and you have an emergency department that has all these special equipment, MRI scanners, CT scanners, you have labs, and you have consultants and all these people, to have your back. We don't have that here. If somebody comes in with abdominal pain, it's like I can go, hey, you need a CAT scan. We'll find out if it's your gallbladder or your appendix or bowel obstruction, whatever. You have to examine their abdomen and decide, maybe you do need a CAT scan. Maybe we'll send you to the emergency room. Or no, you're going to be just fine. Don't worry about it. So that's what I learned about playing doctor, really what it's like to be a doctor. I didn't learn that in school. I didn't learn it as an intern so much. And the secret to success, I found it's very simple, right? With anything, it comes down to the golden rule, right? You treat people the way you would want to be treated. It's the golden rule. This practice up here is as cosmopolitan as any on earth. I think I've seen patients from every state in our country. I've seen them from dozens of countries around the world, probably every continent, pretty much. I can't remember, but it doesn't matter your race, your ethnicity, your culture, your religious beliefs, your gender, none of that. At the end of the day, what really matters for doctors and the patient relationship, and I can speak personally, and for my family, is does the doctor know what they're doing, and do they care, right? At the end of the day, that's what you want, If I had $1 for every time I heard, well, that doctor didn't even listen to me, I'd have hundreds of dollars. If I had $1 for every time that patient told me, it's like, well, that doctor didn't even touch me, I'd have hundreds of dollars. So my practice, I try to do old school, just the golden rule, and it's been great. And I think one of the coolest things about being here, besides this cool setting, right? Grand Canyon, for crying out loud, it's like the greatest landscape on the planet. I know we're all kindred in that, but that's how I feel. I've felt that way for a long time. But you get great patients. The tourists that come to visit, they don't want to be sick or hurt. They're inspired. It's like they're there because they want to get better. They want to enjoy where they're at. The locals, they don't want to be sick or hurt, because if they're sick or hurt, they don't work, and then they don't have a place to live. So they're inspired. They're not drug seeking. They're not, substance abusers. So I get spoiled by great patients, and they're so grateful often, especially in the middle of the night. Back in the day when we did all the emergencies, I would be so grateful. There's a wide spectrum of clinical practice, depending on your comfort level, and as far as a complicated laceration or wound, or setting fractures or dislocations, things like that. You're independent, so again, you can do what you want. There's no one staring over your shoulder, critiquing you, criticizing you, whatever. You get to know their patients and the family, especially the locals. They live right around the street. We're friends, we're neighbors. Here at Grand Canyon, there's search and rescue and guiding, and I got involved with that, with the Park Service, with a lot of the commercial outfitters and stuff, so that was a huge bonus. And research and teaching. This is a great research lab for heat-related wilderness medicine stuff, river stuff, and venomous animals. It's just fantastic. And then a teaching part with Grand Canyon Association, Grand Canyon River Guides and stuff. I've had a ball doing that. So those are the pros. Cons, long days, long nights, low pay. Most people don't say, oh, doctor, low pay. Just give you an idea, when I signed on, Becky and I figured out in the summer the hours were pretty bad. I mean, I was in the clinic a lot because we worked 5 days a week, and then Dr. Worther and I would split weekends, and we were on call every other night for emergencies. But so I was making about $8.50 an hour. If I was called out between 6 and midnight, I got $10. If I was called out between midnight and 6 a.m., I got $15 for that patient. It didn't matter if it was a heart attack at 2 a.m. that needed to be in ICU. They were in congestive heart failure. You couldn't fly them because it's a blizzard. You couldn't ground ambulance them because all the ambulances were out on I-40 for car wrecks and whatnot. And so you're sitting on a patient just trying to keep them alive for 2 hours in this little clinic. So sometimes it'd be incredibly stressful, and that isolation could be really scary. The thing that helped with that was the emergency services here. I think the medics are the best. Our trauma team would be myself, a nurse, maybe an EMT or paramedic, and we would just manage it. And I think the Park Service here at Grand Canyon, shout out to the Grand Canyon National Park, but best medics ever. And this is a crown jewel, so a lot of them specifically want to come to Grand Canyon. It's like, so we're so lucky we score these wonderful medics, and I've had such great relationships with them. And we've come a long way. This great helicopter versus back in the day when you might get evacuated by a mule. This was, I think, an appendicitis. But anyway, so working at Grand Canyon, it's taught me a lot of things, and one of the things that really was piqued in my interest was the unique problems that we'd see, especially from coming out of the back country. It's a unique place with unique problems for sure. When we take all comers. As far as the uniqueness, it's like how many people get the great privilege of shooing deer or elk out of the way when they walk to work, right? Or going for a jog at sunrise around the rim of Grand Canyon, and there's a bighorn. And I've seen javelina, or just the spectacular weather storms and stuff. It's just unbelievable. I just can't get enough of it. At one point, oh, by the way, too, it's a great place to raise a family. Becky and I just, our kids had, half of their childhood, the oldest ones did, and the community, the sense of community is spectacular here. It's a throwback to the old days where neighbors watched out for neighbors. You knew your friends. You didn't lock your door. Kids ran the street. People watching out. Like even Halloween this past week, I heard it was just like the old days where they blocked the street off, the rangers, and kids would trick or treat, and people out there with cider or whatever for the families that would come by. It's just spectacular. And in the thick of that, probably 2 or 3 years into it, I told Becky, I said, I'm the happiest doctor on earth. I am. I'll compare my happiness to any doctor on this planet. I couldn't be happier. So imagine that from a guy who was as disgruntled and distraught as I was sometimes during the training. So I think it's a problem with the system, frankly. Now to speak to the hazards, deadliest natural hazard, you guys probably have a clue what that is, right? Heat. So I'm going to give you some tips for the trail and tips for the river. The major heat illness syndromes in Grand Canyon, these are ones that are life-threatening, potentially dehydration to heat stroke, and this other problem called hyponatremia. How many have heard of hyponatremia? Okay, well, good. Water intoxication. Is that a true heat illness, by the way? No. I mean, if you put somebody in the sun, they're not going to get low blood sodium, right? That's what the hyponatremia is. Hypo is low, and Na is sodium on the periodic table, and emia just means blood. You're not, so that wouldn't happen. But the problem is so strongly associated with the heat because people will drink and drink until they dilute out their sodium. You have to consider that as part of your differential diagnosis if somebody is struggling in the heat. So these two, basically, one is over drinking, one is under drinking, and fluid loss. It all boils down to water with heat illness here. Too much is bad, and so is too little. Well, why is the Grand Canyon so deadly? We all know it can be screaming hot down there, hot enough to fry an egg. But as part of the grand deception, that people don't know, especially the newbies, that how hot it's going to be when they go down there, right? You start on the rim, and there's a seductive coolness about you, so you start to head down, and you go beyond your physical preparedness as well as what you're prepared with supplies and stuff. Desert canyoneering for sure is not alpine mountaineering. Alpine mountaineering, mountains weed out people from the get-go, right? You start to ascend in elevation, it's hard. Gravity's working against you. The higher you get, the colder it is. Canyons, they're much different, right? You pick your foot up, you lean forward, momentum and gravity assist you. And you go down there, and then several hours later, it's blazing hot, and you look over your shoulders, oh my God, there's a mountain behind me. And now you're in for it. So with heat-related illness, I believe that Grand Canyon is the deadliest heat lab on Earth. And I'm going to give you an example of why I think this. Outside Magazine came out with an article about hydration, and this is from 2017. And I'm going to just read it here. Robert Salas has seen it all. As medical director for the Ironman World Championships in Kona, Hawaii, he spent 20 years watching athletes in every manner of distress get wheeled into the medical tent. He's seen hyponatremia or overhydration a handful of times. He's seen hundreds, maybe thousands of dehydration cases. All right, so here's the emergency room ledger. Do you guys remember when emergency rooms did this? Talk about a HIPAA violation, right? Here's your name, here's your age, here's your gender, here's where you're from, here's your problem. But we did that. We would document all the things. People would come in for emergency room. This is over 4th of July in 1996, which is a bad year for heat. It was a bad year for search and rescue. It's still the record. I think it was a 480 below-the-rim search and rescues. And that was before they closed the South Kaibab Trail to people parking there. And that's why there was such a huge number in the mid-90s. But anyway, looking at this, there were, 4 cases of hyponatremia and 1 heat stroke within 24 hours right there. In 1996, we had 30 cases of hyponatremia and over 100 of heat-related illness and 5 deaths from heat stroke, 1996 alone. And we've had, as far as deaths, we've got thousands and thousands of near misses. 1996 also was a pivotal point in my thought processes about trying to educate people. And this is, I want to tell you this tragedy of Philip Graham, which is the biggest inspiration for Over the Edge, Death in the Grand Canyon, that book. A huge inspiration for it, and from an unfortunate tragedy. Philip was a 10-year-old boy from Ohio. He came out here with his great uncle, his great aunt, and his grandmother. And they had planned this hike for several months, maybe over a year. Grandma even had embroidered hats that said Grand Canyon, a huge Grand Canyon enthusiast just like us. Well-intentioned, but it was screaming hot. But the only time, she told me, the only reason they took to July is the only time they could get a permit. They went down, it hit 115 at Phantom, and Philip had hiked ahead with his great uncle, and at one point he got so sick of carrying his water, he handed off to his uncle. He was hot, he was tired, his pack was heavy, and guess what? He quit drinking. Whoops. Uh-oh. There we go. Let's see, I gotta get the, there it is. Okay, so he went down the South Kaibab Trail. He was in front, he saw the river, he sprinted across. And unfortunately, that likely spiked his core temperature. And he got over here and he got that deep sand. If you've hiked over there, you can't really see the river. He was that close to the river, but he got about right there. And that's where he sat down. His uncle caught up and said, "Hey, Philip, we need to keep walking. We need to get to the Phantom Ranch to get some water and Gatorade." And he left. And at some point, Philip stood up, wobbled, and then fell face first into that sand, which was probably about 170 degrees. His eyes were wide open, filled with that scorching hot sand. Some other hikers came by. They rolled him over. His pulse was 180. They could barely feel it. He was breathing like about 60 times a minute. They tried to cool him off with the creek right there. So he's that close. Anyway, we got the call that they were running this code on this 10-year-old boy, and I was on call that day and listening to the radio chatter, and they brought him into the clinic, and he wasn't much bigger than my daughter, who was 7 at the time, and unfortunately he died. And it was one of the saddest moments I've ever had to deal with in my career, because it was so preventable. There wasn't a dry eye in the clinic with the medics, and talking to his mother was horrible. And his great uncle and his great aunt, and they were obviously distraught too. About a year later, his mom called me and said, "Hey, did Philip die alone?" I didn't really know how to answer that. I know he was by himself when his uncle had walked off. And I told her I'd hike down there with her. I would gladly do that if I'd give her closure. I never heard back from her, but I just decided, no one should die like that. A kid for sure. It's like, and so if we can educate people, it was a huge inspiration for the book. Heat-related deaths within Grand Canyon, 116 through 2023. Deaths are from heat, stroke, dehydration, and cardiac arrest. 5 heat stroke victims were 16 years or younger in age. We've had 3 deaths from hyponatremia. Hyponatremia, what happens with that fluid overload is your brain will swell. That extra water has to go somewhere. If it goes into the brain is a finite box. And if it swells too much, it'll herniate. It'll push out through the hole at the bottom of the skull, and you die. We had a death from hyponatremia in May this year, a 36-year-old woman, healthy, collapsed, died from hyponatremia. Anyway, right now, the interesting thing about this is we're so preoccupied with drinking that we see about 12.5 cases, maybe a dozen and a half of hyponatremia annually. A lot of them get admitted. 10 to 1 people are going to be admitted for hyponatremia over heat stroke. So it's an interesting irony. If you get heat stroke, you're probably going to die before you get out of there. Hyponatremia, much better chance to live, but you'll probably seize and go into a coma and need to be in an intensive care unit or in the hospital. So if you're not familiar with hyponatremia, this is what they call the 1,000-yard stare. This guy's brain swelling. He's basically unresponsive to anything. He's not speaking. Can't follow commands. His vital signs are stable, but he's got severe brain swelling. And if you don't turn it around, he will die from brain herniation. I'm going to show you a video which shows a woman who is in the throes of hyponatremia and brain swelling, and she's having some involuntary movements of her arm. She's nonverbal and can't follow commands. This is an evac by DPS. This is from the Phantom area. Thank God for DPS, they fly at night down there. I think, if I remember correctly, she may have seized in the helicopter, a grand mal seizure, but she survived. There's a lot of written about exercise-associated hyponatremia and heat-related illness now. The best source to find information about this, if you're interested, is the Wilderness Medical Society's journal, the Wilderness and Environmental Medicine Journal. I've actually had the great fortune to contribute on the hyponatremia parts of this. Problem for me back when we were really having problems with this is this journal wasn't in existence. So there wasn't a lot of information on it. There's another book that's a ton of information about. This is the godfather of trying to prevent hyponatremia, a guy named Tim Noakes. He's a physician scientist from the University of Cape Town in South Africa, and he wrote this big, fat, dense book called Waterlogged, and you get brain-logged reading it. But I did, and there's great information, but that didn't come out till about 2012. So trying to find out information was tough. And a lot of the most recent information and studies looking at incidence of heat exhaustion, hyponatremia is based on studies done on runners, because you have a controlled population, endurance athletes running through or around wilderness, like Badwater and Death Valley, things like that. But the problem is, comparing a runner who's going through wilderness as quickly as he can versus a backpacker. They're two different things. This guy, it's not about performance, it's about survival, right? So where do you find information about that? And for years I struggled with that, and people would ask me, well, how much water should I drink? How much water do I need? And I didn't have a good answer for that. But I started looking around, and I remember when I came across a book that had that answer. It was The Seeds of Survival from the Ashes of Evil. And as a history buff, especially somebody who liked World War II history, gosh, I really enjoy reading this stuff. I found out, well, part of our strategy in World War II was to develop our troops to fight the Nazis potentially in North Africa, in the deserts of North Africa, and Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, the field marshal, Hitler's greatest general. So the United States Army military, they hired a physiologist named Edward Adolph. And he's not Adolf Hitler, but Edward Adolph, I thought it was kind of an ironic thing. But anyway, between 1942 and 1945, he formulated the Rochester Desert Unit, and they basically did tests on Army recruits and animals in the Colorado Desert of Southern California. They also had the hot room in the University of Rochester. What Dr. Adolph did, so much of it would be illegal today. Incredible stuff. Now, here's the thing in Dr. Adolph's defense. He didn't have an axe to grind. He didn't have an agenda. It wasn't like Gatorade or ERG or some of these sports drinks are going to prove to you that you need to have this X amount of ounces per, hours of exercise. He just wanted to find out what normal physiology was in a desert environment for men, Army recruits, exerting themselves. And I thought that was really cool stuff. Because you think about it, it's like, well, who does a backpacker more closely resemble? Whether it's a guy or a girl, but this guy is way more like that guy than that guy. So, I think the overlap was perfect. And reading that, it was a revelation. That was the coolest darn thing. Here's what Dr. Adolph said about dehydration. Men in the desert tend to become dehydrated even if water is available. So that's normal. Okay, even if it's available. The phenomenon is called voluntary dehydration. Men voluntarily dehydrate between meals and make up their deficits during meals. Voluntary dehydration can be minimized if no meals are missed. So what does that mean for a backpacker? It's like no meals are missed. Like, okay, if I want to keep from getting dehydrated, ding, ding, maybe I got to eat. I got to stop and eat. Adolph proved that. But he also, one of the things that's different with mammals, humans, we drink 75% of our fluid intake when we eat. You probably know it's like, I drink most of my fluids when I'm eating. A dog will lap up, and Adolph proved this too, a dog will lap up their deficit all at once, until they caught up. We don't. So we need to eat in order to keep from getting dehydrated. And we'll come to that food thing in just a bit. So the big question is, how much water does a man need? In order to be efficient, man must have a proper amount of water. How much does he need? People ask me, how much water I need, Dr. Myers? Like, well, here's what Adolph said. This can be answered easily, all that he voluntarily wishes. And by voluntarily drinking, no water is ever wasted. This book came out in 1947, so it's 6 years ago? And anyway, it's timeless. So voluntarily drinking, no water is wasted. So I drink when I wish to drink, when I'm thirsty. So thirst, friend or foe. It's like pain. It's a friend. It warns you. It tells you when something needs to be done, right? If I'm hurting, I need to stop what's hurting me. If I'm thirsty, I should drink. If I'm not thirsty, well, don't drink. You got to think of thirst as the valve. When you're thirsty, the valve is open. Let your system fill with fluid. If you're not thirsty, valve's shut. Don't pour more water in, you're going to flood the system. Here's what said about thirst. Man in the desert in a state of chronic dehydration, his thirst does not prod him to overdrink. So if you use the dictates of thirst, which I figured out a long time ago, and I'm going to show you this, it's kind of embarrassing, but there you go. When I first started hiking Grand Canyon, way back, I started, probably about 19, 18, I was a pretty dedicated hiker, but I knew that if I kept my water in my backpack, because I hiked in the summer a lot, blazing hot, I didn't die, I'm here. Part of it was like, I knew it was in my backpack, I didn't drink it. Maybe like Philip Grimm. I had to keep my hand, even though this is a pre-Camelback, but I would just drink when I was thirsty. My hand got cramps, but anyway, it worked pretty well. So that's the thing about water, drink according to thirst. So what about food? Hey, junk food's in. No fuel, no fun. Salty snacks, dehydrated meal, high calories, carbs, protein, fat. Bring it. Going hiking, bring it. Bring plenty of that stuff, the stuff you really like. Don't worry about the diet. And when people come in to hyponatremia, it's like, what'd you have? And God bless Todd Seliga, when he eats dates and almonds, it's like, he's monitoring his fluid intake. It's like, but I'm going to just say it's a little bit of a safety net to eat the salty stuff. And Todd's a different category. But anyway, with food, it's like you must choose. I think choose wisely. And what I mean by that is, think if you're tired, you're dehydrated, you're a little nauseated, what might you be able to choke down under that circumstance? I always thought it was pretzels for me. Well, one time I was down there and I probably was a little hyponatremic, but I was super nauseated. I ate some pretzels and I started throwing up. So I realized it was Gardetto's. Anyway, the thing we've gone to at Grand Canyon, we've tried to figure out ways to weaken, where people who have hyponatremia, they need salt. They also need to get their, expel that extra fluid. And we've experimented, the rangers down there over the years, probably the last 10, 15 years, we started with ways to get concentrated salt water into people. We started with bouillon cubes because you take those with you and stuff. The problem with those is they don't crush easily and they don't dissolve easily in cold water. Very hard to get them just the right consistency. Then we went to soy sauce packets. We thought, hey, that's easy. You can do that. That didn't work very well. It's kind of repulsive if you're nauseated. So we ended up with ramen packets. And they work really well. You can take the ramen packet, and I would suggest that, just in case, as a backup. You can mix it in usually about a cup of water is about the most concentrated people can choke down because it's not super palatable, but you can adjust that. You want more salt than you want fluid if you think this person might have low sodium. And a story I want to tell you was a guy who got really severe hyponatremia. He was on a guided backpack trip on the North Rim. I think they went to Deer Creek. Anyway, he was 2 or 3 days into the hike. He started feeling really bad. His guide said, "Hey, man, you're getting dehydration, you're getting like heat exhaustion. You know, sit in the shade and drink water." And anyway, he drank and drank, and guess what happened? He got hyponatremia. He got obtunded. He had grand mal seizures back to back. They flew him out. He was in the hospital. I talked to him. I said, "What do you think the problem was?" And he said, "I quit eating." I said, "Really?" So I said, "Why?" He goes, "Well, the guide was making these burritos for us." He says, "They just made me nauseated. It just made me sick to the stomach to think about another burrito." I said, "What would you have wanted to eat? You know, if you had had anything?" He said, "I wanted ramen." I really was craving ramen. And your body will tell you, right? It'll tell you when you want something sweet versus something salty. I was like, "I need some salt. I can tell." Or, "No, man, I feel really hypoglycemic. I would like a shot of that Pepsi or a piece of candy." So listen to your body. So the take-home messages from Heat for the Hiker: nothing is forced. You drink to thirst. You eat when you're hungry. There's no fixed ranges, no fixed timing, none of that. The power of the pit stop. Like Dr. Adolph said, you eat, and that'll help you stay hydrated. Every 10 to 15 minutes for every hour for moderately strenuous exertion in the heat. That's from Dr. Adolph. It took about 15 minutes to compensate for an hour of hard exertion. So think about that. Also embrace the cover-up. You know, the hottest places in the world, in these deserts, for millennia, they've known that if they cover up, they're much safer. You can reduce your sweat loss by half, your fluid loss through sweating by covering up as opposed to, you know, going shirtless and getting sunburned on top of it. The other thing that helps is artificial perspiration. You know, when you're feeling bloated, you're feeling really fatigued, you're feeling really hot, don't drink more water. Pour it over you. If you have wet clothing and you stay wet that way with artificial perspiration, which is through convection and conduction, it cools you off, you can reduce your sweat loss, your fluid loss through sweating by 83%, according to Dr. Adolph. So that's another great one. All right, probably enough of heat. Who wants to go on the river? Ready for the big ride? Who's been on a river trip? All right, who wants to go on one? All right, we'll see if you still feel that way in a few minutes. I love this. He doesn't want to go over there. He doesn't want to have anything to do with it. Watch. Nope. That's Hermit Rapid, by the way. No way. No thanks. That's my favorite part. He gets that horrible beating, then falls off. So how deadly is Big Red? You guys ever wondered that? All right, well, I'll tell you how deadly it is here in a second. So part of the, I got to thank Becky, my wife, for this. When I first got to the clinic, I was invited on a couple of river trips to the Park Service, which was fantastic as a volunteer. But I told her, I say, this is really cool stuff. We should take like our families someday. And she's like, what? I was like, oh, my dead body. And I'm like, why? And she's like, super dangerous. And I go, you don't know that. And she goes, well, you don't know that it isn't. And I said, what if I prove it? Anyway, the proof is in this monograph called Fateful Journey. I co-wrote it with a scientist named Larry Stevens. You guys might know him. He's the Grand Canyon's foremost scientist. Just a wonderful guy. I love that guy. And Chris Becker, who was our manager at the clinic. But it's the who, what, when, where, how, why people get hurt, the level of severity, whether it's on river, off river, and death on river trips. Really boring. It's a scientific monograph. No one read it but me and Larry and Chris. Becky couldn't even read it. But that said, here's a me with the family. Weston was 9, and so, it's not as dangerous as you might think. It still has its danger, and so you can't take it lightly. I'm going to speak specifically to the Colorado River and why it's dangerous, the unnatural born killer, the Colorado. And what I say unnaturally deadly, you can probably guess why. This bad boy upstream, Glen Canyon Dam. At full pool, the water does come from bottom of the dam, and when it's full pool, there is no solar warming for the deepest parts of the lake, and so what comes out is really cold. You guys probably remember when that really frustratingly cold, blazing hot, and you just want to dive in the river, and you're like, oh my God, this is so cold. 45 degrees. So knowing that, it's like, let me ask you this, what's the most deadliest spot in the Grand Canyon? Is it Lava Falls? What do you guys think? Anybody vote lava? Crystal, maybe? Hermit, Hans? You guys aren't falling for this. Okay, the most deadly spot is Pipe Creek Beach. You probably knew that. 12 drownings. This is at the bottom, the foot of Bright Angel Trail. You go down Garden Creek, there's the river, and another mile or so, you're at Phantom. But 12 drownings there. 7 were intentional swimmers. 3 were actually trying to swim across. 2 accidental fall-ins. All were hikers. 1 female physician died there last year. She was going down to meet a river trip. She was trying to cool off. She stepped in the creek, or into the river, slipped in the rock, and was flushed into Pipe Creek Rapid. Another deadly spot is the boat beach. 8 drownings here, 7 intentional swimmers, 1 log rafter, 1 woman. All were hikers, and then 3 young men in 2009. I want to talk a little bit about that. I did a talk for the Grand Canyon Field Institute in January 2009. It was on Colorado River, and trying to talk about risks and stuff. And I said, unfortunately, next death's probably going to be, somewhere at Pipe Creek or the boat beach, and we need to change that signage. Unfortunately, 4 months later, the Tri-City Baptist Church out of Phoenix, there was a bunch of kids that went down there with a group. There were 4 young men, Jody Merrill at 22, his brother Mark at 16, and Mark's buddy, Safe Savea, and another kid that had plans. They planned it for weeks. They were going to swim across the river. They grew up in Phoenix. They swam in pools. They're good swimmers. That's why they want to do it. Everybody's tried to swim across. They're a good swimmer, and they know it. What they don't know is the dangers of the Colorado River, right? So they came down the Kaibab. They got down here, and they went down right about here, over there. And that's where they jumped in, all 4 of them. All 4 of them were flushed downstream. One of them realized he was in trouble. He swam like a mad boy to shore, and made it to shore. The others didn't. They swam downstream, and they drowned within minutes. So why did they drown so quickly? Was it hypothermia in that cold water? It was cold then, because the lake was still a full pool. They didn't drown of hypothermia. They drowned of what's called cold shock. So when you know how it is when you put your foot in cold water, even if it's just a toe, you're like, there's a huge involuntary gasp. That's part of the initial immersion. That's what's called a cold shock response. That's within the first 4 minutes. Between 5 and 30 minutes, short-term immersion, loss of performance. Your muscles are sore, and you feel like lead, and you can't even hardly self-rescue. And after 30 minutes, it's long-term immersion, the onset of hypothermia. That's why people, there's people that died. I was a Titanic nut when I was a kid. Read everything on the Titanic, but that one baker who was drunk, he survived like 2 hours in that ice water. So you can live a long time in cold water. What happens is this cold shock is what kills you, especially when the water's turbulent. So a huge involuntary gasp when you first go in, then you hyperventilate. Whoa, it's cold, right? And then there's the reduced breath holding capacity. Remember as a kid, you try to hold your breath in the bathtub, and you hold it a long time. And you try to hold it in cold water, it's like, no way, I gotta get up. So your breath holding capacity is probably 1/3 of what it was. You get hypertension, your blood pressure can shoot up. Dysrhythmias, that's abnormal heart rhythms, could trigger a heart attack or a stroke, especially if you're at risk for those. Drowning in Colorado, we've had 93 deaths, over 90% male. 80% weren't wearing life jackets. 57 were non-river runners. 23 deliberate swimmers. Accidental fall-ins or mysterious drownings, like 15 of those. 36 river runners, 12 were wearing life jackets. Those ones who probably died with a life jacket was probably a cardiac event. Some of them could be flush drownings. But I want to tell you this. Here's the good news about flips. Most of them have happy endings. I don't know if you guys recognize somebody in this picture. Most people do fine. This guy right here, anybody know who that is? Here's a close-up. You ever see Mission Impossible? So this is a flip from 1983, and Michael Guillieri, my co-author on Over the Edge, he was one of the boatmen on this trip. Here's the trip. Whoop. Dang it. Okay, sorry. Anyway, she's was the paddle captain and flipped, and Tom Cruise is holding her arm up. And I guess after the flip, they swam lava, and he survived. They got really excited, woohoo! And he had a huge booger hanging from his nose, and no one wanted to tell Tom Cruise, including David Katzenberg and some of these big movie producers, that he had a booger. And Michael, who's pretty bold, if you know him, he had no problem going, hey, you got a huge booger hanging off your nose, so you might want to lick it off or wipe it off, whatever. He did. So take-home messages from the river: bad hearts and cold water don't mix. Don't let Crystal Rapid or the Bright Angel Trail be your heart's stress test. Or stress test is where you get your heart checked to see if you have a plumbing problem, if circulation's bad. If you have risk factors for heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, family history, you smoke, you're out of shape, you should get a stress test before hiking and boating in the Grand Canyon. Too many people found out they had heart disease the hard way, or didn't live to tell the tale. Don't wade in beyond knee deep in the current without a life jacket. Don't attempt to swim across the river, even if you're great, even you're an Olympic swimmer. I wouldn't recommend that. Any swimming at all should be limited to the calmest of eddies. And non-swimmers and those prone to panic because of that hyperventilation thing and possible aspiration, they should consider a motorized river trip over an oar-powered river trip, or just opt out. It may not be your gig, you know. But if you're really afraid, get on those big, giant motor rigs. They don't flip very often, but they do. The biggest lesson with the river is swimsuits may be optional, life jackets are not. So I want to end with some Grand Canyon Clinic pictures. Some of these might make you a little bit squeamish. I remember the first night I was on call at Grand Canyon Clinic. In the middle of the night, I got called a Bright Angel Lodge busboy or dishwasher rode his bike home and said, yeah, he had a head injury, and they brought him in by ambulance, and he had face planted on a rock and it tore off the bridge of his nose. And the thing that stood out in my mind, I still see it, it was like a blowhole on a whale. He had a pretty serious head injury, but every time he would cough or breathe, bone fragments and blood and snot would come out of this hole. But anyway, so this is, now what am I getting myself into here? But this guy, this is what they call a trimalleolar ankle fracture dislocation. And we used to set these all the time, but incredibly stoic man. He was hiking down the Hermit Trail. He rolled his ankle, broke it, dislocated it, and hiked 1.5 miles on this till he got to the river and got somebody radio out for an evacuation. These are what they call tib-fib fractures, tibia, fibula. Both are women, both were on river trips. They got their legs caught between the frame and the boat. Ouch. This guy was pretty stoic. This is pretty ugly. Sorry. I asked Becky if it was okay. She said yes, so blame her if it makes you queasy. She said these are okay. Anyway, they said, yeah, this guy has a laceration on his leg. We're going to bring him to the clinic. I'm like, super. And I'm like, whoa, holy cow. So this guy was in Hance Rapid. They went through a big hole. It was really sharp. His boat hit this hole, flexed really hard, snapped the spare oar in half. He was flown out. He had a foot caught in the oarlock, but then he got his leg harpooned by the broken end of the oar. And it filleted this down. It went all the way to the pocket, went almost to his ankle. And I said, God, you're going to have to go to the operating room to get this cleaned up, but you mind if we get a picture of it? And he's like, sure. He was really cool. Really cool. This guy, unfortunately, alcohol and like greasy pans on stoves don't work. He was pretty hammered. His pan on the stove got on fire, and he did what a lot of people do. He wanted to throw it out the door, and he grabbed it. It was frying his hand, and he let go, and it fell on the floor, grease everywhere. Big fire burned down his trailer and also did this to his hand. Okay, so this guy, you look at his right arm there, he's holding on. It's swollen. I'll just tell you that. It's really swollen, his hand, his arm. Any idea what happened to him? There's no bruising, it's not deformed, so I'm going to tell you it's not trauma. It's a hint. Oh, some of you are so smart. There's your hint. So 90% of snake bites happen to guys, 80% of the hand, and guess what they're doing? Picking them up, showing off, testosterone poisoning, right? Hey, look how brave I am. Hey, look at, I'm going to kiss it now, too. Anyway, in this guy's defense, he was reaching down to grab toilet paper. He didn't hear it, it didn't rattle, and it nailed him on the finger. We used to do anti-venom, they call it, in Grand Canyon Clinic. We would administer that, and it was pretty scary. It was derived from horse serum, and you could have an anaphylactic reaction. I probably would because I'm really allergic to horses, but given it, time was tissue, so we would do that there. Even back in the day, we'd treat heart attacks, everything. It was pretty fun, but pretty scary. So this guy was on a river trip. Big guy, 6'3", 250 pounds. His cup fell in the river, and he dove in to get it. The river was murky. What he didn't see was a rock about a foot below the surface, and he landed on his head and broke his neck, crushed 2 vertebrae. He's paralyzed from the neck down, and he was floating face down in a rapid, above a rapid. Crystal is what I was told, and his brothers saw him. He wasn't moving. He's floating, and they ran out there with a backboard and put him on it, rolled him over, protected his spine. He was flowing out. He was immediately treated, taken to surgery. He was given steroids to help swelling in around that area where his spine was damaged. And the amazing news is that he didn't end up quadriplegic. He only had some residual deficit of his left arm, and thank God for the the rescue and stuff that was done there. I just want to end with some reflecting back on a career. Now that I'm in twilight time, I still work at Grand Canyon Clinic. Still have fun. I was just there this week, and some really great patients, really, really rewarding. If I could go back in time, I would say to my younger self, I'd be like, look, what you're doing, it's not unlike hiking the Grand Canyon. It's maybe really, really rocky up front, but I'd be like, Tom, just hang in there, okay? Because it won't always be rocky. And also, some of these are the paths most rocky that you're going to find your footing most true, just like in Grand Canyon. But it's not always going to be rocky, and there's going to be flowers and good times, happy times, and euphoria when patients are saved and have good outcomes. And that's the way it's been for me. And I'd go back and do it all again, despite how hard it was up front and how disgruntled I was. But it's been an amazing career, and I really appreciate your time today. And if you have any questions, I will be around to answer them. Thank you. Were you here for the first symposium? Yeah, I used to think no, but when I did this, the first Grand Canyon Historical Society Symposium, I had a debate with Brad Dimmick if James White did it or not. I bet he didn't. I just think there was too many ways that he would have drowned and all this stuff, and you couldn't get logs to move fast enough to make it through as he did. So I did an experiment up above the daily section on the Colorado, but Moab, Utah, and I put some logs. I brought them up there from Grand Canyon. Tom Martin, he's in here, he helped me with this. And you'd be surprised how those waterlogged logs can track really well in the current. They stay in the current, they move really fast. So I'm kind of thinking, maybe he did. But I already committed to saying he didn't, so I had to say he didn't. But I think he might have, real long shot, but maybe. I don't know. You have to ask my wife. No, I think it's control. No, maybe a smidge. Anything else? Yeah, Sheldon.
So it had always been drink to stay ahead of thirst and dehydration. Now we're saying drink to thirst. Repeat the question so they can hear.
Sure.
We're finding that if we drink to thirst, will the water assimilate into the body quickly enough to head off the dehydration? Is it
Mm.
time you drink to the time it gets into the system.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. So, yeah, if you drink to thirst, can you keep up with the losses and all that stuff, and the time lag? That's what Sheldon's asking. There was a huge propaganda thing. It was with Gatorade and the Sports Science Institute. I mean, for the Florida Gators and, I forgot the guy's name who developed it. I mean, they did a lot of propaganda about the value of these sports drinks and electrolyte loss and all that stuff. And it became this big push that you need to drink X amount to stay ahead of the curve, that if you're already thirsty, you're dehydrated. Well, that's not, according to Dr. Adolf, and it's not a problem, but thirst became a bad thing, it's villainized. And so it's led to all this stuff. And the U.S. military is actually the worst for the number of deaths from hyponatremia. But anyway, you answer your question. It's like, if you drink a thirst, if you do it appropriately, yeah, people who don't and they get way, way behind, yeah, it's harder to catch up. I mean, at Grand Canyon Clinic, we'll see somebody who's already had a hit to their kidneys because they were so dry, and it may actually take 2 or 3 days for those kidneys to fully recover. But if they haven't gone to complete kidney failure, they usually will. So as long as you don't get too far down that slope, of dehydration, you're usually fine, especially if you have normal kidneys to begin with. Yeah. Yeah.
So how do they treat hyponatremia as far as getting rid of the excess?
That's a good question. So back when we first started seeing this, the first case I could come up with, actually Gail Burek, I don't know if you guys remember Gail. She won a Pioneer Award back right after Harvey Butchart in 1998. But anyway, she had been a ranger here a long time ago, and she wrote an article in the 80s, and I swear this person that she was describing as heat exhausted was actually hyponatremic. And there's a lot more subtleties that go into that, like if I vomit, or if I am nauseated and I vomit, and I don't vomit anything, what do you think I got? Probably dehydrated. If I vomit and it's a lot of fluid, what do you got? I'm probably hyponatremic. If I have dry heaves, I'm not hyponatremic generally. At least the first one. But anyway, so we would try to figure that out. And when we first started treating this, we would do saline, regular saline, which is concentrated salt water for an IV. The problem with that, it was very slow in correcting that. And if you give too much concentrated salt too fast, you could cause what they call osmotic demyelination of the brainstem and cause death that way. So there was a huge reluctance to do anything with really concentrated salt water in the vein. Now, and it was really cool, another doctor friend of mine, we kind of collaborated in this about 2012, where we brought hypertonic saline. It's 3% saline, triple the concentration of regular IV saline. And you can administer that in boluses of 100 milliliters back to back to back, and it quickly corrects the hyponatremia but doesn't risk this problem of demyelination. So we have hypertonic saline here in the field, and there's some really great stories of recovery. If you got a couple minutes, or I'll tell you one. Anybody want to hear one? Okay, this is a really great story. So it was a couple from Georgia, and really young, healthy. He's an engineer. I think she was, might have been an engineer as well. They hiked down the Hermit Trail, 115 when they got down to Hermit Creek. She's feeling really poorly. She was about 5'2" and about 100 pounds. Anyway, he had brought a guidebook, and she's nauseated, she got a headache, she's not feeling good. He's like, oh, and as he reads, like, you're dehydrated, you have heat exhaustion. There was no mention in this guidebook, and I know the guy who wrote it, this doctor who wrote it, but he didn't put it under heat illness, hyponatremia, because it's not a true heat illness. Like, oh, you've got dehydration. So why don't you sit in the creek, drink this water, and hang out. I'm going to go hike down the rapid, and I'll come back. He does that, and he comes back, and she's worse. I'm really feeling bad, and she's just horrible headache, nauseated. She starts puking, right? And he's like, God, what's going on? He brings her over to the shade, he's pouring water, and he's fanning her, and he's, just try sipping this Gatorade and stuff. And then she has a grand mal seizure. Yeah. And so he's like, holy crap, it's like, and he carries her after the seizure. She's postictal, means that you're out of it for a while after you have the seizure, up to an hour. Puts her back in the creek, pouring water over. It's like, and he's reading the book. It's like, crap, she has a seizure. She's probably in heat stroke. You can seize with heat stroke. Puts her in there. He's trying to get her to drink water. And now the sun goes down, and she's pretty out of it still. And then all of a sudden she has a second grand mal seizure, a big one, a big tonic-clonic, and in the dark. And seeing that, he's really freaking out. And he doesn't know what to do. He's praying. He's a very religious man. And he's reading the book. He's like, gosh, how could she have heat stroke and still be doing this? Like, what am I doing wrong? And he's trying to figure out what to do. He's laying there with her. She's barely responsive now after these 2 seizures, kind of going into a comatose state. And then along about 11 o'clock, she's laying there kind of sleeping. And then she has another grand mal seizure. And this time, she's like practically dead. She just doesn't even move, barely breathing. He's just laying there. She bit her tongue. There's blood everywhere. And he's completely freaked out, doesn't know what to do. He's like, he said it was the worst decision of my life. He said I propped her on her side, and I put rocks around her so she wouldn't like choke on her own tongue and stuff. And I left her because I had to get out. He was screaming at the top of his lungs for help, and he didn't have any way to get a rescue out. And so he starts running up the trail. He gets to the rim right around sunrise. He runs into a couple on the trail, and he says, hey, I need some help really bad. My wife's really sick down there. I think she's had heat stroke or something's going on. And well, the guy's like, hey, well, I'm a doctor. Tell me what's going on. He tells us, he goes, God, I wish I could help you, but I'm a psychiatrist. He's like, well, why am I talking to you? And he runs up to the trailhead hermit, and he goes over to Hermit's Rest. He's banging on doors, and no one's answering. And his cell phone gets a signal. He calls the Park Service, and they flew in. They flew over. The rotor washed. They're flying over. They could see her laying there. She didn't move a muscle. She was just sprawled there, laying there. Hair's whipping around. She's not moving, and all like, oh, this looks bad. Like she's maybe dead. Got down there, they checked her blood sodium, super low. She's in a deep coma. They load her in the helicopter. They give her the hypertonic. This is after we first brought it there. And it was really exciting when we had this option for the Rangers. Gave her the first bolus, gave her another bolus. And by the time she got to Flagstaff, she was talking. She was sitting up, conscious. Unfortunately, she did have some kidney injury, and some other problems. But she was in the hospital about 4 days. But I went to see her. She had a full recovery. It's a great story, but a horrible, horrible, stressful time for the husband. It was just absolutely terrifying, so. Yeah, but anyway, hypertonic saline, to answer your question. That's a long answer, but it's great stuff. Yeah. Hmm? I haven't heard that. Thirst is a really powerful mechanism. If you're dehydrated, people in intense, the throes of intense dehydration, they'll do just about anything to quench thirst, and the body will do that. So unless you have severe dementia or something that an otherwise normal person, I don't think that's very common, because people drink blood, they'll drink their own urine, they'll drink, like whatever, glass cleaner. So I think for an otherwise normally cognitive person, probably not likely. But if you have some of that dementia stuff, which God willing none of us will get, yeah, I could see that. So yeah, it's tough. I don't drink. What? Yeah, me too. Yeah, there is. You want to hear it? All right. Well, it's kind of a long. So when I first got here, I asked Dr. Wergler, Jim Wergler, my partner, I asked him about house calls, and if he ever made house calls. He said, yeah, Tom, I made a few in my life. He's like, is it cool if I make them? Will Samaritan get mad at me? I work for Samaritan Health. So I'm like, no, your time. You can do what you want. So there was a Havasupai lady at Supai Camp. You guys know where Supai Camp is? You heard of it? It's like an inholding of the Havasupai Reservation, one of the spots here. It's down Rowell Road, just a few miles from here. It's about 500 acres. But some old buildings. At the time I would go out there was a lady named Harriet, and she had leukemia, sweet as can be. I just loved Harriet. But I'd go out there to check on her, and one night I went out there to see her, and this is before they rehab the houses at Supai Camp. They were shacks by this point. They had been built in the 20s, and they were junk. A lot of them didn't have it. They didn't have water in there. They had a main shower area. They had some electricity, that wood stove heating and stuff, and I went out there, and big Supai guy, I was looking for Harriet's house, and this big guy, it was winter and super cold, guy comes out, huge man, ended up becoming a buddy of mine, but he stood in the door, he came to the doorway, and his frame swallowed the entire doorway. I could see the light behind him, but it was just Supai are big guys. He's like, hey, what are you doing? Come over here. And I'm like, okay, don't kill me. He's like, I told him who I was, and he goes, oh, Harriet, she's over there. I'm like, you want to come in? You want to have a beer? And I'm like, no, but thanks. But anyway, Harriet, I go see her, and she's like, I'm not long for this world. And she told me that. And anyway, she ended up dying of her leukemia, but she froze to death in her, they found her frozen to death in her house, no heating. But anyway, that guy that I met, thanks, hon. Cecil. Anyway, Cecil became a friend. He had a grandbaby. I got a call. It was our Christmas party in 1996, maybe, or something. A call for a hypothermic baby in the clinic. And I was on call. Dr. Wurgler was having the party at his house. And I could time it I could sprint to the clinic usually in under 30 seconds. I keep my clothes right there, and I just sprint. And I was like, oh, this is a sick baby. I sprinted over there. And as soon as I saw that, the infant was 4 weeks old, and it definitely looked very sick, looked toxic, bad color, kind of ashen, making some posturing, making this weird cry like an injured rabbit, and I talked to the nurse real quickly. She gave me the vital signs. Like the baby's core temperature was 89, and unfortunately, the baby it was a failure to thrive issue. The baby only weighed like 4 pounds, 4.5 pounds. Even at that point, it was a really tiny little guy, and the fire had gone out in their wood stove. Long story about how that happened, but the baby was severely hypothermic, and we started immediate efforts to try to rewarm the baby, trying to find an IV site. The baby was super dehydrated. The nurse was our best one, even with neonates, because sometimes you have to use a scalp vein or arm vein, and we couldn't do that. We were trying to warm it with lamps and warm water. Check the blood sugar. It was a little bit low. We really need to give this baby glucose, warm fluids, all stuff. We couldn't get an IV going, and and we started to have to bag the baby. Heart rate's dropping, respiratory rate's dropping. It's like, and I remember, learning about a procedure called a cut down to try to get vein access to on an infant, where you would go make an incision by a scalpel on the inside of the ankle, try to identify the vein, dissect it out, and stick a catheter in there and give fluid. And babies were hard, but about a year earlier, I learned a new procedure called an interosseous needle. It's where you stick a needle in the shin bone. They taught this class up here as pediatric advanced life support. I didn't learn it anywhere else. I just learned it, and we would train on a chicken bone. It was about as big as your finger, this bone, and you take a big hollow needle and you jam it into the shin and try to run fluid into the bone marrow and glucose and all that. And I told, we were going to start chest compression. I said, hold off on a minute, I'm going to try this interosseous thing. And I couldn't get it. I said, well, I think I might have now try to run the fluid in. And I was breaking into sweat. And and the nurse is going, you got it? And I go, I don't know, I think so. Try it. Try to run the fluid. It's like, nope, not going. I was like, crap. And then I said, if I push any harder, I'm going to harpoon that baby's little leg to the table. And anyway, I just kept trying it, and finally she goes, how many of these have you done? I said, one. It was on a chicken bone. And anyway, but the baby was dying. That moment, the baby he was going to die. He was already going into respiratory arrest and cardiac arrest. He was going into a really slow heart rate because he was so hypothermic. And then finally I got it in there, and we gave the IV fluids and glucose. Actually, the baby started to perk up. We flew him out, and he ended up in an intensive care unit in Phoenix. He had flown to Phoenix, and years later, I saw him, went out there with my son, and he was riding his bike, and I said, hey, Billy. His name was Billy. I saw his grandma. I said, hey, is Billy around? Yeah, he's over there. I'm like, hey, Billy, come on over here. You remember me? He goes, no. I'm like, I said, I'll never forget you. Can I look at your leg? He goes, why? And I told him a story, pulled his pant legs up. He said, which one? I go, I don't remember. pull him up, and there's a little teeny weeny pockmark scar on his shin. And he was fine, healthy and happy, and God, that's my best save. That one I'll never forget. Yeah. Here's a backstory of that. I'm going to end with this and let you guys go, but it was so funny. Cecil was a good friend of mine. He's long gone, the grandpa. And, things that went down, it's like, you got to find out why that fire went out and this and that. And Cecil was pretty upset. And the next day, we get this phone call. Hey, Cecil's on the phone. He's really pissed. He wants to talk to you. I'm on the phone. He goes, and I knew him by first name. And I was like, what's up, Cecil? He goes, I'm suing you, Tom. And I go, what for? So what you did, he says, I'm suing you for what you did to my grandson. And I said, Cecil, we saved your grandson's life. I guarantee you he'd have probably died within, 20, 30 minutes. And he goes, well, I'm suing you. I go, well, you do what you need to do. If you feel like that's what you want to do, it's like, I'll take it to my grave that we did the right thing for your grandson. And anyway, hung up. Then about a week later, he calls me up, and the nurse says, our office, Cecil's on the phone. He wants to talk to you. I'm like, hey, Cecil, what's up? He goes, you're the greatest doctor, Tom. I said, Cecil, you been drinking? He says, yeah. I go, all right, well, that would mean a lot more to me. That would have meant a lot more to me about 6 beers ago. I says, you sober up and you still feel that way, you come tell me, okay? Thank you. Thanks.